Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Bushi and today I've got something that I haven't actually got a name for yet. I'm thinking of calling it the Bundle Rundown, but I haven't really decided. But anyway, what it is a showcase of current games in a bundle. So for example the Humble Bundle or any other bundle you can think of. Humble Bundle springs to mind because it's what I'm talking about today. What do you know? So today I'm going to be talking about the Humble Indie Bundle 11, and I'm kind of wondering why I'm doing this, and if you're watching this you may be thinking why I'm doing this as well, but I think I've got a good reason for it. Charity's a wonderful thing. You know, you're giving your money away to presumably a good cause, and it's something that you can do quite easily nowadays with the internet, and you can also get something out of it. With the Humble Bundle you can get some great games, or possibly some great games. However, we don't live in an ideal world and we're not always able to give money to charity, and we have finite resources and finite funds ourselves, so it's not always as simple as just giving your money to every Humble Bundle and every charity bundle that shows up. You sometimes have to be selective because not everyone's got the money to throw around, even though they are quite cheap. While the Humble Bundle may be incredibly cheap, and you know, there are those who are strapped for cash and otherwise unsure about whether a bundle's worth getting. That's the other thing, is it worth even putting the money down for it, or is it better to skip and get the next one? So what I want to do is round up the games in this current bundle, and probably a lot of other bundles that come out, since I just buy a lot of them. I've realised I've been buying them for weeks now, and I've been enjoying a lot of them. So I thought I'd give you my thoughts on each of the games in the Humble Indie Bundle 11, after a couple of hours of gameplay. Objectively speaking, the Humble Bundle is usually always worth it, since you're rarely asked to pay more than $6 for about 6 games, or possibly more. Although if you feel that you want to donate more, you can, that's an option, but on the basic it's usually paying about $6 to beat the average for 6 games. Nevertheless, it's good to know whether the game's your cup of tea. Objectively, the deal might be amazing. You might be getting $100 worth of games for $5, but if the games aren't what you want, then there's no point getting it anyway. So I feel it's necessary to shine a light on the games. Moreover, I think it's really useful just to get more people talking about the Humble Bundle. It's already a big deal, but I think the more people talk about it, the more people will know about it, and the more likely people are going to give to the charities. And also, the developers get a bit of money as well. It's a win-win situation for everyone, I think. So without further ado, I'm just going to run through the games which are currently available in the Humble Indie Bundle 11. In the Pay What You Want section, which you can pay what you want for: Guacamelee Gold Edition, Dust and Elysian Tale, Giana, Sisters, Twisted Dreams, and The Swapper. Now, if you decide to beat the average, you'll be getting Antichamber and Monaco, What's Yours Is Mine. And as a little disclaimer, a little note at the bottom, you will also be able to get more games that are going to be dropped sometime during the week. I assume it'll be about 7 days towards the end. I think it's about 10 days at the moment. So once that day comes, you'll be able to get even more if you beat the average. It also includes one Giana Sisters Twisted Dreams exclusive comic, if you're into that type of thing, and soundtracks for all 6 of the games featured, and I presume they'll do the same for any more games that get added. I don't want to talk too much about the charities involved. I'm just going to tell you what they are, and then if you want to go to the website and find out, then feel free to do so. I don't know enough about them, so I'm not going to comment so much, but the charities are Child's Play Charity and the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and the links will be in the description, as well as a link obviously to the Humble Bundle so you can pick it up if you so wish. Now onto the games. Firstly, we have Guacamelee Gold Edition. This game came out in April 2013, and it's best described as a Metroidvania meets fighting game. It has Metroidvania style platforming, power-up collection and backtracking, but the combat is more like a fighting game with combos, etc. It seems to be all Mexican themed with mariachi music, luchadors and the like, and the art style of music is quite cool. However, I feel that the art style is possibly one of the weaker in the bundle, and the music is so-so also compared to some of the other games featured. The gameplay is enjoyable, the combat is pretty satisfying with the ability to throw enemies and, chuck them about and, uppercut them and do all sorts of crazy moves to them. However, I found the platforming to be a bit irritating at times, and I even ran into 1 or 2 glitches regarding the platforming and switching between light and dark worlds. Speaking of which, the mechanic of swapping between the light and dark worlds is also kind of cool, but it's also been done by other games such as Edward McMillan's Time Fuck, which is spelt FCUK and not the traditional FUCK, and also it's in Giana Sisters as well, so that's a mechanic that's been used in other games. Overall, I enjoyed the couple of hours I spent with Guacamelee, and for those looking for a new Metroidvania game with a fun atmosphere and some funny internet culture references along the way, you'll probably appreciate the game more than I did. It also has 2-player co-op, and 2 extra notes on the end I've just added here. Gamepad definitely recommended, and it does have seizure warnings. I went in thinking I won't have a problem, no seizure warnings for me, that's not a big deal. But there are a couple of really flashing bits, and I was actually quite taken back by it, so be warned that might be a problem for you. Anyway, overall, I kind of enjoyed it. I think other people enjoy it more than I did. Possibly one of my less enjoyable games in the bundle, but it's pretty good nonetheless. Next up we have Giana Sisters Twisted Dreams, which was released in October 2012. It's a 2D platformer in the style of collection platformers, and what springs to mind for me are games like Rayman and Super Mario Bros. Not really so much a puzzle platformer, although there are a couple of puzzle oriented bits regarding switching between the sisters, which also switches between the worlds, similar to Guacamelee, but you can do it at will. That's the main mechanic, the ability to swap between sisters and therefore between worlds, alternate realities, in which things may be appearing differently. So in some worlds there might be a wall there, whilst in others there might not. Both of the sisters have unique abilities as well, so you have to switch between them to progress and pick up as much collectible stuff as possible. The game does also have hardcore difficulty modes for those that desire to play it on those at that difficulty level, but it appears you have to beat the game, or at least a proportion of the game, in order to unlock those areas. And from what I played of the level I was on, it wasn't too difficult, and the primary mechanic is pretty cool graphically, because the worlds will change upon swapping, so trees will become withered and then grow again, which is quite nice. And however, in terms of actual gameplay, the mechanic can get a bit samey after a while. It's not that interesting, and it's already been done by quite a few games. The controls seem pretty tight, except for some of the movement felt a bit sketchy early on, but I got used to it pretty quickly. And also graphically, it's possibly one of the more high fidelity games in the bundle, despite being the oldest in there. It's quite 3D, even though it's a 2D game. It's kind of like 2.5D, things pop out and stuff like that, which is quite nice. The music also switches, like the worlds do, depending on which sister you are, and the music itself is really quite awesome. More classical bits with some rock guitar tones thrown in there for good measure. Overall, probably my least favourite title in the bundle. Honestly, it just wasn't for me. It's okay, but it's just not something I'm looking for. But if you are looking for a collection-based platformer, then this may well be for you. Next we have Dust, an Elysian tale, released August 2012 on Xbox and on May 2013 on Steam. Sorry, I've written 2014 in my notes. It's a 2D RPG with some Metroidvania backtracking and combo-based combat. The Metroidvania, I don't want to stress too much, it's not really that big a thing. The combat and the platforming, I guess, is a bigger deal. The combat's really enjoyable with some awesome ways to throw enemies, create a dust storm with the sword, etc. You should be seeing this all in the background. You can collect items, level up, obtain new skills, which gives it that RPG feel. The game is heavily artistic and quite stylized with this almost cartoon aesthetic. Not wanting to mention Rayman too much, but it actually reminded me quite a lot of the original Rayman game. Possible minor gripe for some people, there seems to be a bit of a furry thing going on. People who that really matters to will know what I'm saying, and if you dislike that, then it may put you off, but honestly I didn't have an issue with it. I don't think it's that annoying, but if you really are like anti-furry or something like that, you might have a problem with this. I just got on with it. The story wasn't too obvious in the first hour of the game, except Dust, the protagonist, acquires a talking sword and has no memory of his life before the events of the game, so he must work out what's going on. That's all I know about the story. That wasn't the reason I was playing it really, I was playing it more for the gameplay. The music's really fitting and quite beautiful as well, and overall I'd say, compared to Guacamelee, perhaps the most similar game in this bundle, Dust eclipses it in almost every way imaginable, except perhaps the platforming in Guacamelee, which is a little bit more inspired. They've got one or two issues still. There's some annoying stop-start gameplay in terms of the dialogue screens, and I found myself skipping through a lot of it to get back into the gameplay. You get stopped a lot rather than being able to listen to dialogue as you go along. And I had a pretty nasty experience with one of the checkpoints where I died, went back to a checkpoint, and then I had to go all the way through these cutscenes and all this stuff. I don't mind, tough checkpoints, but it was really quite irritating, and I had to go all the way back, watch a load of cutscenes, and it's just not something I really wanted to do. And that dialogue, it was all coming back to that dialogue being quite stop-start and getting between you and the game. Overall, however, I'd say Dust and Elysian Tale is really entertaining, really good combats, possibly some of the best combat. It may be, you know what, it's the best combat in the bundle. I'd say combat's much better than Guacamelee. Really fun. Nice combo based, looks very nice, feels really satisfying, and it's not too difficult and it's not too easy. It's a fair challenge and you still feel like an absolute badass playing it. Game number 4 in the Humble Indie Bundle 11 is The Swapper. This may be the biggest surprise for me in terms of how much I enjoyed this game. The game came out in May 2013, and when it came out I pretty much ignored it because I didn't feel like playing a puzzle platformer or any puzzle game. But after playing it for a couple of hours, I've become completely obsessed with it. The game's essentially a 2D puzzle game with some Metroidvania backtracking, but in which the primary mechanic is the ability to create clones of oneself and use them to complete various tasks. The game's set in an abandoned facility, presumably in the future on some sort of other planet or something like that, in which the lone protagonist needs to work out what happened, how to solve it, and presumably how to escape. The story is told through the environment and through some really cool computer logs, as well as some occasional run-ins with some other characters, but I'll leave it there. I don't want to spoil anything for you. The gameplay itself is really satisfying and it's not too complicated. The majority of the puzzles in the early to the middle of the game require a bit of thought, but shouldn't require you to have to look up a guide or anything. And most of the puzzles simply require a bit of consideration, while maybe also asking for a bit of good timing. However, a few of the puzzles required precise placement of clones, and it was less about pod logic and puzzle solving, and that felt really quite contrived. Overall, however, I think the main mechanic is as prolific as something as, say, portal creation mechanic. I'm really impressed by it, and it's really cool and really compelling, and the game does a really good job of teaching the core mechanics quite quickly. The art style is dark but not necessarily gloomy, and the sound design is really stellar. It's just amazing. The soundtrack is incredibly ambient in parts and quite moving, and it's possible to sit down and chill out to, and it really fits the game quite well. It's potentially my favourite soundtrack from the bundle, which is saying quite a lot because there's some really great music in this bundle. I intend on completing all of the games in the bundle at some point, but I'm compelled to finish the Swapper first, since the game just feels so well designed, so inspired and so thoughtful. Now it's time for the 2 Beat the Average games, of which there are Antichamber and Monaco, What's Yours Is Mine. Antichamber came out in January 2013, and it's the only game in the bundle that I'd had some previous experience with. Since getting the Humble Bundle, I've actually completed it before I completed the Swapper. I sat down and finished it in a few sittings, and it's best described as a first-person puzzle game with some platforming elements, and it does a really good job of perplexing players. Tongue twister there. And it requires you to use your brain in a way that a lot of games don't ask you to. A lot of lateral thinking's involved in order to get through it. The game really pokes fun at our preconceived notions of how video games work in terms of graphically, in terms of this kind of non-Euclidean geometry thing going on where you look at objects from certain angles and they're completely different from other angles, and it kind of feels impossible. For some people it may be a bit too pretentious and esoteric, but I think it's actually still quite accessible. I'm not going to be one of those people who says, oh, you just didn't get it if people didn't like it. Because I think there's grounds for not liking Antichamber, but honestly I think it's worth giving a shot nonetheless. You might be surprised by how much you actually like it and how much completion of some of the puzzles can make you smile. The art style and graphics are quite minimalist and may not be to everyone's taste, and personally I think it's a mixed bag. Sometimes it looks really beautiful with some of the objects, but other times it's really bland. The soundtrack is ambient with some great nature sounds thrown in for good measure, and it ties the experience together quite well. If I had a couple of criticisms of the game, I'd say firstly, some of the puzzles towards the end of the game feel a bit too contrived and trying too hard to be difficult, and obviously they need to make it more difficult as the game goes on, but it doesn't feel natural, it feels quite artificial, since it requires like having to reset whole areas in order to do it. And also it's hard to track where you're going from time to time, but I think that's a personal gripe. I think a lot of people would really enjoy that. Overall, however, I'd say that Antichamber makes beating the average worth it in and of itself, since it's a game that should leave you scratching your head for quite a while, unless you get a guide and play it like that. But I'd say you're kind of missing the point of the game if you're using a guide. The game isn't about necessarily completing it, it's more about getting through all these different puzzles and seeing how it affects your outlook. And finally we have Monaco, What's Yours Is Mine. This is best described as a top-down heist game which came out in April 2013. It's incredibly stylized and it's kind of a stealth game, maybe described as a 2D version of Payday, the heist, which I don't really like saying, but I guess that'd be one way of envisioning it. There are multiple classes to play as, with the objective seeming to be to just get through levels, collecting as much cash as possible, and then reaching your objective and then getting the hell out. The storylines seem to be there for each of the characters, which is really cool, and there's online co-op and leaderboards both daily and all time, and apparently there's some PvP as well, but I didn't actually check that out. Graphically it's quite simplistic and mostly pleasing on the eye, although I think some of the characters don't look too nice, and the music fits really well as the piano playing gets more frantic as you get spotted by guards, etc. Overall, it appears to be quite a tongue-in-cheek and humorous game, although I might be completely missing the point there, and the leaderboards, multiple classes and online play, which I really recommend you try, probably give it more shelf life than any other game in the bundle. And I guess it's now time for my summary. Overall, I'd say this bundle seems to have platformers, puzzle games, and Metroidvania combo fighting games. Overall, I'd say if you're into any of those games, this bundle's definitely worth it, especially since there's more games coming out in the next few days. I'd say no matter what gets released with alongside them, this is still worth it. I'd say beating the average is worth it both for Antichamber and Monaco, especially when they're considerably more expensive to buy on their own. So beating the average here is really worth it, especially if you're only going to pay, the bare minimum in order to beat the average, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend you do. I'd recommend that you pay as much as you feel like you need to or can in order to obviously give to charity, but from a perspective of purely value for money, the value for money on Antichamber and Monaco alone makes the bundle worthwhile and beating the average worthwhile. Overall, I'd say the general standard is quite high in this bundle. You've got possibly the worst game being Giana Sisters Twisted Dreams, and it's not even necessarily a bad game. It's just in comparison to Dust, the Swapper, Guacamelee, and Antichamber and Monaco, it's just not as good. I'd say Guacamelee wasn't really one for me, whilst games like Antichamber, the Swapper and Monaco really did hit home, with Dust kind of being a bit of a mixed bag, but I think if I complete it I'll probably enjoy it along the way. Overall, long answer, yes, this is definitely worth it, especially if you like the games in here, and I think that's pretty much me done. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. Links will be in the description, and have a nice day. Thanks for watching, see you later.